Glad it's Thursday. Every Thursday, we're always here, always at the same time with some great guests. A lot of you already know my background is in education and athletics. And so my partner here, we created this company called HSBA. And so you can learn more about that if you go to our website. But we will always strive to change the narrative of our young Black males within education. And when we start looking at the changes, like that people talk about change and we want change and we want something different in the educational system. We want rights. We want, all these things. We decided that we wanted to be a part of the change. We wanted to make sure that we created a space so that our community can grow. We can get, a better understanding on the needs of our youth and what they're needing within the educational system or the justice system. And so it's so important that when we come here on Thursdays and share with you the guests that we find, it's all to come together for our youth, for our community growing. So that's why we bring people in front of you who have a great influence or impact on our community. And some of us, I've heard of some of these people, and some of us haven't. But if you just really dig deep and really understand people's story, it will start making sense on why change is needed in our Black communities. And so that's why we come on here every Thursday at 5 p.m. Central Time. And so you have to do your part in sharing this video. So right now, before we get started, please share this live video. And if you're listening to it later, share it then. But please make sure that you're doing your part in supporting the Black podcast by sharing.
She said it all. I don't think I have to say anything else. Honored to be here another day, another week, boldly leveraging the affluent connection for knowledge, the individual that we have before us today. And we hope that you all are doing the same, because when we come together as a collective, we can impact so many more lives. We can serve at such a larger capacity, and we can help just really start to change the tides and advance some of the things we've already got rolling. My background is in the psychology space, human behavior, social work background, really working with people, helping them figure out why they do what they do, why they think the way that they think, and then eventually help them change their thoughts, change the things that they're doing, and ultimately change what they see in front of them. I work a lot with entrepreneurs from across the world because a lot of people are trying to get in this whole entrepreneurship space, but also we try and open up these opportunities and expose the space to a lot of our youth, because in the communities that so many of us come from, we don't see entrepreneurs. We don't see these types of opportunities. So we need individuals like myself who's been able to develop multiple companies and help run multiple companies to expose, look, this is out here. This is something that you can do in opposition to what it is that you may have saw your uncle, big cousin, mom, dad, so on and so forth do. So always moving forward in a progressive direction. I'm just thankful to have been able to partner up with Sherelle, Dr. Sherelle Hobson, and her excellency in the space that she occupies. And then together, just being that force. But the two of us, we can only do so much. There's only so much that we can do as a duo. So we love to bring individuals in, like we're about to open up to you right now, just to help us stretch and expand our reach. And without further ado, we bring to you Ms. Lakeasha Williams. How is it going?
Hello, how are you?
We
Doing well.
are doing well. Yes. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to be on the Black podcast. We truly, truly, truly appreciate you and love everything that you're doing that we see. And so we definitely look forward to learning more about you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for reaching out.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Well, we want to get right into it because when people look at all your social media and they looking at all the things that you're doing, like, look at her life. Her life looks so perfect. Her journey looks so smooth. She ain't look like had no issues, no challenges, no nothing. She is just highly favored, but we know that behind every glory is a story. And so we like to know
Absolutely.
where you're from and the dynamics of your family.
Yes. So I am originally from South Carolina. My family's from South Carolina. I was actually born in Allendale, South Carolina, which is a small town about an hour away from Aiken, South Carolina, about 2 hours away from Columbia, South Carolina. So very small town. And that's where Lakeisha hails from. My grandmother actually decided to leave everything that she knew in the 1960s and just embark on a new life. She knew that she wanted a new life, other than what she was accustomed to. And she came to New York City in the 60s on a sleep in job. And I oftentimes do tell that story because, again, when we measure success, success is measured in many different ways. And the fact that my grandmother had the courage to leave the South, to leave her family, to leave an abusive marriage, and leave just everything that she knew behind to start off fresh someplace else because she wanted her children to have a different life. That was very amazing, right? And she definitely was ahead of her time. And so that's how my family, came to be in New York City because of my grandmother, my late grandmother.
Wow, wow.
Mhm.
So growing up, like when you think about the beginning of your life, how was your community? What was the environment like? The type of school that you went to, and then just kind of go to maybe a high school if there was any organizations or clubs that you were a part of. So just kind of tell us a little bit of that journey as well.
Okay, so childhood journey. So I grew up in what's considered to be like the poorest sections of Brooklyn, Northeast Brooklyn. Grew up in East New York, and then we later moved to Brownsville. And my family always lived in Bedford Stuyvesant, and we was always there. So that was my childhood. And during the 80s, at the when crack exploded and was everywhere on the scene, we actually lived next door to a crack house. So imagine being a young child in elementary school, and like I knew that what was happening was wrong. Like I definitely knew that, but it was common practice, during the 80s when I was a little girl. But I had two things that I feel always kept me focused, like my family, my parents. My parents always talked about just us having a different future because it's four of us all together, but three of us who, my parents raised in New York City, and we definitely had daily conversations about the life that my parents wanted their children to have. And then I was fortunate enough in the 1980s to attend an elementary school where that principal I also feel was ahead of her time, right? Because in the 80s, when we know Reagan starved out communities, and in my opinion, was the biggest drug dealer, during that time. But I was exposed to everything there. I'm a natural lover of the arts. So, I had music classes, I had dance classes, theater. We had a computer lab way back when, just doing science experiments. Like I just remember my elementary school being a rich, you know, um, just having so many different resources and so many different exposures. But I was also in the quote unquote top classes. And of course, I didn't realize this until I got older, but even with my younger brother who learned differently, there was still more to be done for children who learn in a different way. So fast forward all the way through high school, I remember being in middle school, and again, I'm still on this fast track. So they were recommending, a small group of us for different specialty programs. And ultimately, I attended one of the specialized high schools in New York City, which is Brooklyn Technical High School. And I just remember getting to that school and kind of feeling overwhelmed, because back in East New York, in middle school, like we were one of few, right? But then going to tech, we were one of many, and it was thousands of children, at tech. Then I definitely don't remember feeling connected to anyone in the school, and I'm talking about like staff members, um, there wasn't a lot of what I feel as a child, at that time. Like there was no, just someone to motivate and inspire. We were numbers. So it was very like far removed, I feel, the teachers at the time. And I'm still in the hood, so to speak, still trying to live up to all of the expectations that my parents set forth for me. But I also found myself pregnant, as a teen mom. And I had my first child at 16, and that was definitely a devastating moment for my parents, and for me too. And I just knew at that point in time when I had my son, I just felt like I had to do so much more to make sure that I made my parents proud. And then for me, because I grew up during that era, so now we're in the 90s, and a lot of the young men that I grew up with, because of what we were exposed to during that time, being a drug dealer was glorified. And because those were that was the majority of our experiences. Like I saw a lot of that, saw a lot of young men going to jail, saw a lot of death, so we were definitely traumatized, during that time. And so when I had my son, I made a promise to myself that my son was not going to be a statistic, my son was not going to go that route. And so I just kicked into high gear, and I actually finished high school a semester early. I always knew that I was going to go to college. I knew for ever since I was, a young child, being the oldest in my family, the oldest daughter, oldest granddaughter on both sides. Like I always had like that, just taking care of other people, in me. So being a teacher came naturally to me. So off to college I went, and off to college my son also went with me. And by the time I finished college, I had two sons. And both my sons also attended school with me while I worked full time, went to school full time. But again, it was important to me to be that role model for my children. And it was important to me to show my sons that, we have to persevere and rise above whatever our present set of circumstances are. So that was the beginning, in a nutshell, just through right, when I was finishing college, I would say, with two kids and a divorcee by that time.
Go ahead, Brian.
I'm just sitting here, and at a certain degree relating, another degree thinking about a lot of these friends and colleagues, so on and so forth, that I have that went through similar circumstances. Um, one of the reasons of me, leaving Miami. I moved to Miami after I finished my undergraduate, and I got in child welfare while I worked while living down there, and
Mhm.
I started to see individuals having children at a young age, not really having the support to continue in life. Those kids coming into the child welfare system, so on and so forth, and many more issues that I saw as well. But I thought to myself, you know what? I can really laser in on helping fix this issue down here in Miami, or I can go back
Mhm.
home and I can
Mhm.
help fix that issue at home. So I came back here and I started focusing on that specific demographic, those individuals about to make that transition to adulthood and maybe don't have the resources necessary to be successful.
Right.
And that's been the majority of my work since I've been back here in Mississippi. But I look at that, and that's the part of the journey that people don't see when they look at you today.
Right.
And so many go through that and they cease to visualize a potential of a future like the one that is, currently your present. So
Mm-hmm.
it takes individuals like myself, like Dr. Hobson, like yourself, to be that individual to show, like, look, this can be you or better. You don't have to allow your current situation, like you said about yourself, you don't have to allow your current situation and circumstances to dictate what your future will be.
Right.
So when it comes to you, not only as a mother, but in the educational space, first, um, after this stage of your life, how long was it before you started to navigate into the educational space?
Um, well, in college, I majored in education. I actually majored in education. Um, and I began working as a para, which was a teacher's assistant.
Mhm.
And I actually got that job through high school. So when I finished up with high school, my first son was actually there too, because they had what's called the life program, and so you could bring your child to school with you, which is how I was able to finish up school a semester early because I already had my credits and everything, but I wanted my diploma. So when I when I went to college, Brooklyn College, I started out, well, I want to say I started out, but I did like part of my undergrad degree at the University of South Carolina. But I finished up with everything at Brooklyn College, and was working as a para, working full time, going to school full time. Had both my boys at that time, and it was definitely a struggle. Um, Graduated with my bachelor's degree, started teaching. And at that time, I'm still only thinking about teaching because again, just it's the brain is a powerful thing in terms of when we see other people doing things, right, that we don't necessarily have a connection with or relationship with, we see that as far removed. So that's not for me because, of course, I knew principles existed, but I never saw that as an option for me. I never saw being an author as an option for me, right? But when I started teaching, I had a principal at that time who saw something in me. Dr. Janice Jacobs, she saw something in me and she encouraged me to continue to grow and develop, my leadership skills. And so as a result of her, working with me, I went back to school and, well, first I started coaching teachers. I was a staff developer, helping to develop teachers. Then I went back to school to get my admin license and, did the administrative route because it just continued, working with children, working with families, and working with my colleagues. And as an administrator, I served as an assistant principal for several years. I was also a special education administrator, focusing on how are we best serving our children? Because even when we think about special ed, it's not just about students with IEPs, but it's actually a continuum of what are you doing for all children, because again, I'm very passionate about the things that we do to uplift our children and the experiences that we give them and the exposure and opportunities that we give them, because that's what equity is all about. Equity is not about talking. If you're talking, then that's not equity. Equity is about doing. So what are we doing for children so that they can see a future that's beyond their current set of circumstances, right? um I was also a principal coach supporting, 32 principals in the district. And now I'm here, at the school. This is year 4 for me at Shine 399. And even coming to this school, as a principal, I didn't see this level, of success at this time. But I was already a community person by nature. Was always doing different volunteer things in the community with my children, even as I was raising them, and just the different things that I did as a teacher throughout my educational career. But when I became a principal, it was just that much more apparent because I refuse to just sit there and not. I wanted my children to have everything that I felt was given to me, and in order for me to do that, that meant that I had to, you know, be that community leader and reach out to, different community-based organizations just to make sure that we had a plethora of support in our school for the children, for the staff, and for the families.
Got you. Now I want to go back. I want to go back real quick. So you had to go through your obstacles, even while you're in the process of getting your degree and such. You've got young children, so you are having to not only develop resilience but implement that new character from the resilience, like simultaneously as you go through the process. Now, how early or how soon were you able to start to make a connection with the students that you served, to make a connection with them to where if you saw them going through whatever obstacles in life, how early were you able to connect? Look, I went through X, Y, Z. I didn't allow that to stop me. I'm not gonna allow you to let that stop you either. Because something that I jotted this note down. Like, you didn't see yourself going into one of those higher levels of leadership initially,
Right.
but somebody saw that in you.
Yes.
So based off of what you've gone through yourself, what is that something that you maybe have seen in these children and been able to make that connection to kind of pull them up?
So what I have learned, is that we're not very intentional with the conversations that we have with children. And sometimes we don't recognize the limitations that we actually place onto children. So it is absolutely critical that we pour as much as we can into our children. But when I reflect, my parents could only give me what they had. So they knew that they wanted our lives to be different. But because they had only gone but so far, right? They couldn't give us anything else other than hope. But I'm telling you, there's nothing more powerful than hope. Because even though we grew up, like I said, next door to a crack house, right? We knew that our life was different, even while we were living next door to a crack house. So my parents definitely gave us something solid and profound, in the fact that they gave us hope and talked to us about our future life, that they wanted to be different, but they couldn't quite name it, right? Because they hadn't experienced it, which is why, in my 20s, when I was teaching, again, I had never experienced that next level personally, which is why I'm saying that even though children, we get to see how other people live, whether it be in the schools or the neighborhoods or on TV, but the brain is a powerful thing. If children are not connected to it, then that's not their reality. And they don't see that as being something that's attainable for them, which is why it behooves adults to pour so much into children and have these conversations with them all the time and name it. Like, let's name it. I have a 5-year-old today that I told him, listen, you're going to be the future president, right? Like, we have to name those things, and we have to have these conversations with our children every single day. Like, we have to affirm them. You are great. Greatness resides in you. Greatness resides in you. What is it that you love? I tell my families all the time, tap into your children, because whatever everyone possesses natural gifts and talents, right? We just don't necessarily know how to bring it forth, right? And so it behooves every adult that's in the life of a child to realize that we have to nurture that and develop that, help the child to develop that within themselves. So I'm very intentional on the conversations that I have with children, being a teacher all the way through being a principal. And now that I'm a principal, like, my children are exposed to so many different things. And we're a Title I school, which basically means, high poverty school. But if I'm not at work, I'm on podcasts. I'm in a community doing different things, because I want my children to have a rich exposure to all of the possibilities. We have a partnership with an organization called Smell. Our children are as young as kindergarten, work on developing their business plans so they could be entrepreneurs. We have coding, and of course we have the arts. So you want to provide a variety of experiences for children to help them unfold their natural gifts and talents and have the conversations with them. Like today was our student government induction ceremony, and we had a community leader come in to speak to our children about how all of us are leaders, right? Including my students who have their top 3 areas of concerns, right, themselves, and how they want to help the school grow and get better. So we have some future politicians, in the place as well. But again, we have to be intentional and strategic about the experiences that we give our children as young as elementary school. If we wait for high school, I don't want to say it's too late, but we have to develop these things. We have to set that strong foundation. And so at Shine 399, any child that comes into contact with, Principal Williams or Shine on Lakeasha, as people call me too, I'm going to have these conversations. I'm going to pour into them. You are worthy. You are beautiful. You are, deserving of everything that you want for yourself. And then when you say that often enough, children start to believe it.
I love it.
I absolutely love it.
There's
You
a
on
few
fire.
I'm gonna recap these few points real quick that a lot of people really need to take heed of. Be intentional with your language with the
Mhm,
kids. Be
mhm,
intentional on a daily basis. I see we have in the chat as well, a
mhm,
daily basis. When you get more, you give more. So
mhm,
we can't fault our parents for not giving us more. They gave
mhm.
us what they could. So once we
Right.
get more, let's us give that next generation more. And when you know better, do better. Um,
Absolutely.
don't just talk about it, be about it. So
Absolutely.
you alluded to all those points, and I think like we can't just let those just like fly over our heads. Like it's serious. It's serious business out here. And
Mhm,
when we get to certain levels of influence, certain levels of exposure to new things in life, we got to show it to that next generation. And like you said, from the jump, when they little, when I was
mhm,
little, so many of the things that I've made possible for my daughter now, I had
mhm.
no idea of their existence. But even if you're not there, like you mentioned, even if you're not there, at least expose them to it. So once they get to your age, they'll be there.
Yes.
Wow, 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 wow. So, a lot of times in education, I've been in education for 17 years. You start, you come in and you're like, you're on fire. You're like, I want to do these things. I want to make all these changes. I'm going to do all, change all these lives. And education really takes a special special person, right? Like people don't understand, like this is, it is you are constantly being pulled on. I mean, there's things that you have to do to just kind of to feel yourself, but it's like as soon as you feel yourself with a little bit, somebody is pulling you,
Mhm,
especially when you're working in Title I schools and the different challenges that come with that. um how do you remain like for so long to still have that fire, right? Like, because sometimes you can get so drained or overwhelmed or people say burned out from just constantly giving and sometimes not seeing, you know uh you're constantly sowing these seeds and you're like, okay, like I'm waiting for
mhm.
that, to see that change or to see what you have envisioned. How do you remain so passionate? Because as you started to speak, you've been very soft spoken, and then once you started getting into the fire, like we have to be intentional, okay? Like I'm not playing with y'all. That's when I was like, okay, here she go. So how do you still how do where do you go? What do you do to remain in that space of just like, no matter how tired I am, no matter how many challenges I have to face, I'm still gonna be on fire. Like, where is that coming from?
Because this is personal for me. This is not about work, right? This is what I believe is my calling, right? And I've had several positions in the DOE, but regardless of the position, my focus is always serving the children and serving the families. And of course, taking care of myself, because you can't pour from an empty cup. So I do lead a balanced life. And if you follow me on social media, like you'll see that, right? Like next week is vacation and then I will rest. right? But that's definitely important. But I do believe that to whom much is given, much is required. And this, I believe in God, and this is something that I feel God has placed, you know, on me, in me, through me. And so I just want to use up everything that He has given me to just be a part of the positive change that we know we need in our society. As I said to my student government children today, right? It's not our job to just list off the problems that we have, right? But what leaders do is leaders are going to show up and take some action and make sure that things are happening to quote unquote right the wrongs or to make things better. And that's what leadership is all about to me. So I'm not going to just complain about what I feel how I feel things should be, but what can I do? Because I think sometimes that's what happens with folks, right? They get overwhelmed, right? Because it is a lot. But I think if we focus on, what can I do within my own area, right? Then just do that. And then that means you're a part of the solution. So like we know that our children, just the data tells us this, right? We know that children especially Black and brown children, they don't necessarily love themselves the way they should. Because when I look at, we talk about crime statistics, I'm like, let's peel back the layers, right? And let's focus on what we feel are the triggers. And again, I just said earlier, you can't pour from an empty cup. Well, when we look at some of the research, and especially that of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? You can't get to the top of that pyramid of self actualization if we have not addressed the basic needs. And I don't want to get all social political, but poverty is a social construct, right? And so if children and families do not have their basic needs met, then we can't even get to, the next levels of that pyramid so we can ultimately be at the higher end. So again, I'm very intentional about making sure that our children love themselves and affirm our children and make sure they know that they matter. So I did an activity during the election, the Biden-Harris election, um, and when they were elected that night, and everybody was so happy and excited. And even me, right, a professional woman with all these degrees, this long-standing career, but I was excited with representation because it was like somebody looks like me. And so I went back. I saw a poem on social media, Brown Girl, went back to my school and did the activity with my children. My children were so excited because, again, we talk about real life things, right? My children were so excited themselves. We did the poem. I posted it to social media, which I usually do, right? But that video went viral. And it went viral for two major reasons, right? Because there was a large group of people who were not happy about it, right? They were comparing me to Hitler. They said I needed to be fired. And I even received death threats. I had to file a police report at the nearest precinct to my school because how dare I have Black and brown children in my school, but how dare I affirm them and make them feel good about who they are. But on the flip side of that, there were also millions of people around the world who were just so amazed by seeing a group of Black and brown girls just be so proud of who they are. And they wrote about us in the paper in India. An Italian news station reached out to me, interviewed me. We're on ABC7, WPix 11. And so what that experience taught me is that we still feel invisible. Black and brown women, still feel invisible around the world. So I said to myself, what else can I do? Because, death threats weren't going to stop me. John Lewis said, good trouble, right? So let me get into some good trouble. And I said, you know what? Let me write a book. And that's what I did. Shine on Brown Girl, which is already an Amazon bestseller, right? And I am going to tell the stories of our young children. So not only do they, because we know we have books that, that have characters that look like them, but no, tell their stories. Because a child in Flatbush, Brooklyn, their experiences are different from someone who's out in the suburbs, on a farm somewhere, right? Because again, those are the experiences that our children need in order for them to know that they matter. So representation, not only how someone looks, but representation in terms of people validating your story. When you validate a child's story, that makes them feel powerful, like they matter. Because like I oftentimes tell folks, when children walk into your school building, guess what else walks in with them? Their skin color, right? Their language, their hair texture, all of those, their culture, all of those things walk in the building with them too. And we cannot, remember, I went back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? We can't get the children to pass tests and do well if they don't feel good about who they are and don't know who they are and from where they come from. So all of it is connected. So when I think about education, like for me, it transcends student passing a test. It transcends that for me, which is why I said like this work is very personal to me. And I told my children this week, because when I look in the audience and I see their faces, guess who else I see? I see me. I see me.
I think something just right there at the end that you mentioned, um, education is more than just learning. Um,
Mhm.
so many, I mean, in today's day, period, and so many
Mhm.
of our public school systems, we just want the kids to learn so that they can pass the test, so that they
Mhm.
can move on, we can continue to get funded, so on and so forth. I was doing a clubhouse, I was on a clubhouse session. I think it's still saved on my profile, a session probably about 2 months ago, where the question was, what is the difference between school and education? Because if
Mhm.
you just think about specifically our American school system, I forget who said it, but they said if you have an education from the American school system, you're undereducated. If you don't go to the American school system, or like you don't go to school, you're uneducated. So pretty much, regardless, you're, for lack of a better word, you're screwed. So, so the thing is, so many of our systems have their hands tied simply based off of the fact that if you look at the setting, and we'll do some comparisons here. If you look at the setting of a school system or of a classroom specifically, look at what a classroom looks like, your traditional classroom right now. You go in, you walk in, you got your rows, your desks, maybe your sometimes tables. You got the teacher standing in the front, all the students in the rows paying attention. That's today. You
Mhm.
look at um, communication devices today.
Right.
This little tiny thing that can fit in your hand, that you can say something and someone on the other side of the world can hear you within a matter of seconds. The phone 100 years ago, completely different. We've
Mhm.
made so many advancements. We've modernized it so much, but we haven't done the same when it comes to education or
Yeah.
school.
Right.
So a lot of teachers, because of us, not only teachers, but administrators, period, because of the way the system of school is set up, hands are tied, and there's only so much that can be done within the confines of that classroom, of that school system in and of itself. And I think that's not, I think, but that is where some of the professionals, educational professionals outside of the actual school system itself, that's where we come in. Whereas
Yes.
let us be the resource, let us be the supplement. One thing that I love doing, I'm actually on Tuesday of next week, I'm going to speak on financial education and mental empowerment at my old high school.
Mhm.
I'm going in on 4 different classrooms, and they have certain things that they can do as teachers, but there are certain things they just can't put on their plate because they have so much that they're demanded to do already. So I think it's just so important, specifically for us to have these types of dialogues, to where there's people who have a tentacle, so to say, in the educational space, but they're not a teacher. There's
Right.
individuals that have a tentacle in the school system, but they're an athlete or a former athlete. So they
Mhm.
can be sort of a mentor for student athletes, so on and so forth. So I think it's just so important for us to understand the difference. Yes, there's a difference between school and education. Learning is only a portion of true education. There's
Right.
learning, there's retaining, there's regurgitating, there's being able to teach what you learn, because that's when you truly have grasped it. Um, being at the current stage of your academic profession, what would you say your perspective as far as on not only on the traditional school system in and of itself, but would you say you've really seen much of an evolution in your perspective and or your leadership when it comes to working in the space that you're working in, or kind of speak to where you were mentally going into, we'll say coming right out of college, going into the profession as compared to now, like how confident or competent you are, and the confidence you have in what's actually going on for the betterment of the kids.
So there's a lot of questions there. um, when I think about when I was a child in school compared to now, I definitely see differences. Like for example, with special education, right? There was lots of reforms that had to go into place because you can't just give a child an IEP that you haven't worked with, right? But the way the system is set up and structured, yeah, it takes years for, but that's society. And so what I like to say to people oftentimes is that schools are not a separate entity from society. Schools are a reflection of. So it's not enough for us to just talk about like the changes that we see in school, but let's talk about the changes that we see within society, because schools are a reflection of society. And we know that we've had, I mean, this is Black History Month, right? And so when we do the timeline, sure, laws went into place years ago, but that doesn't mean it penetrated the hearts of people, right? Which is why we're still fighting for, certain things even in 2022. And so the schools are the same way, right? The schools are the same way. Um, but just from my own like perspective, like I said, I do see changes for the better, so to speak, compared to when I was a child in school. However, there's still so much more change that needs to happen. And it takes, powerful people, such as I belong to two organizations that's, you know, grassroots organizations that's about, bringing about the much needed changes. And one of the organizations is Off School Grounds, where it's a group of principals, community leaders. Dame Dash is also in the group. But it's just a community of people coming together to make sure that we bring about the necessary changes for children, and that we disrupt the system, so to speak, to make sure that our children do well, right? I also belong to another organization, Black Influencers United, right? And that organization has partnered with several other organizations, and I also serve on the Black Commissions group, where we're rolling out the first ever Black history curriculum in New York City. And we know when we get that right in New York City, then we're going to take that across the country. But it takes people who are willing to going back to John Lewis, to the good trouble, right? Like you have to disrupt and dismantle status quo. That is the only way change is going to come about. So I'm gonna do a little pushback in terms of educators who have a lot on their plate, which is why I said earlier this has to be a calling, because it is a lot on your plate. But if you're not up for the challenge, or you're not up to the task, it's okay, but you just have to go and do something else. Because our children deserve to have people standing in front of them, people working with them, people nurturing them, people loving them, people wanting the best for them. Because we are a part of the educators are a part of the village that it takes to raise children. So it's so much more than reading, writing, and math, right? But I do believe that we can't do it alone. So I just talked to you about different organizations where there's different, um, people from the community on board to bring about the necessary changes. Like, I don't do this job alone. I don't do this job alone. I have a lot of community partners. So yes, people have to be vested. We had our My Brother's Keeper induction ceremony the other day, and I made a few phone calls last minute. We had the guest speaker and all of that, but I was like, you know what? I want some more men to come and talk to my children, and made a couple of phone calls the morning of, and I had people show up. But they showed up because we are the village that it takes to raise children. And when we have more people, like-minded people like that, then we will begin to see more changes, come about. And not only the school system in New York City, but the school system across, this country.
I love it. I love it. I love it. Being in the business space, doing a lot in the business space, often you hear ROI, return on investment, return on investment. Lots of people want to see a real quick return on
Yeah.
investment. Okay, we're in this microwave society. We want
Hmm.
to do it now. Let me see a result now. While I was at LSU, first couple years working on my doctorate,
Hmm.
I ran across the four letters SROI, so social return on investment.
Mm.
So a lot of people don't persist, so they don't see the social return on investment. It takes time to see the social
Yeah.
return on investment. You have to change behaviors, and those behaviors have to mature over the years, and then you start to see that return on the
Yeah.
investment in the community. So that's kind of what you're alluding to. We can't have people that are in the academic space for a paycheck, that are here
Hmm.
just because I just like kids. No, like, you have to be called to do this work.
Yeah.
Me going me going from, I started college as an accounting major, and then ultimately my final degree that I've gotten, as of yet, in social work. Like, that sounds backwards to a lot of people. So you go
Right.
from accounting to social work, like, y'all broke folks over there. Like, it has to be a calling. Like, there's a reason why you're not doing this because, oh man, like, I would love to be a social worker. No,
Hmm.
you see something, as you mentioned earlier, there's these natural talents and gifts that we have, that talent or gift is like, I don't care what you think you want to be. You finna come over here and do this because
Right.
this is how you impact lives. And the work that I specifically have done over the years, and man, time is just it's just ticking. Time is just ticking. But I look back to one of the first young lives that I touched, and I mention every so often. I'm gonna go into not gonna go into details today, but it's a young gentleman. I spoke at a school, and we didn't communicate for years afterwards. And I got a message in my inbox on Facebook, and he was telling me his successes in life. This was like 3, 4 years later, telling me his successes in life, and he was attributing it to me actually speaking to him, taking him home, speaking to his grandmother, speaking to his cousin, who was like a big brother for him, because so many people weren't in it for the long run. It was an
Right.
alternative school at the time. He was like, I want to thank you because you're one of the only people that took the time to talk to me and actually care about what was going on instead of just trying to tell me what to do. So we have to understand that we may plant a seed today, and that seed may not, blossom for years down the line. But we can't be scoreboard watching. We can't be
Right.
looking back waiting for a harvest. No, just go out
Right.
there and impact and impact and impact. And you're serving at the level that you're serving at, just like the individual that saw the leadership in you. Somebody is going to pick you and say, "Look, you can make so much larger of an impact on this stage. Come, let me
Hmm.
show you the way." So it was just listening to your story. I love, obviously, you don't want to wish any difficult circumstances on anyone, but I love the fact that you had children at a young age because it really pushed you to be resilient. And by default, you started to become an example of what can be, and not an example of complaints and excuses. So I just want to, give praise to you for doing the work that you're doing, and not allowing situations and circumstances to tell you that, well, I guess, my life is chalked up as a statistic. So
Right.
I
Not
love it.
myself, not my black boys who are both college educated, got their careers,
Nice.
got their entrepreneurs, And I'm also a grandmother, and my granddaughter, 5 years old, also has her own business, Serenity Nail Polish. So no.
That's it. I'm telling you, like one generation after the next.
That's right.
Right?
We got to keep going. But again, it's not enough for just me to make it or my children to make it, right? I just believe that we're all here on this earth together. And you had said something earlier, right? And I oftentimes say this to people who have the attitude of, well, it's not my kid. Well, guess what? We have to take care of all of our children, because it will impact all of our
Mhm.
children. And I repeat that to people, like, really understand what I'm saying here. We must take care of all of our children, because it will impact all of our children, good or bad.
Man,
How do you want that impact to be? So it behooves all of us, the moral imperative, that we do right by all children.
Wow.
now see, you're giving me goosebumps. Um, when I first moved into this community,
Mhm.
there was a whole lot of kids running around playing, and they didn't have a father in their home. And where I live, there's a huge grassland, like right beside our apartments. It's where like all the kids in the community would come and play. So these kids would always just start gravitating towards me. I'm like, y'all ain't my kids. Like, go on and talk to somebody else. And this one little boy was like, he called me daddy one day. He said, I want you to be my daddy. And like, I was, no, I don't need you. Don't be saying that around nobody else. I ain't trying to get in no type of trouble.
Right, right,
But
right.
then I had to think, you know what? He doesn't have anybody in his life, a male figure, that treats him the way that I treat him, that listens to him, that when he gets in a fight, that don't just get all over him, actually talk to him about what he just did. And I could have easily only tended to my kids, come back inside whenever the other kids, trying to come and get my attention. But like you said, other kids, how we treat other kids, what we pour into other kids, eventually, one way or another, is going to impact our kids. So,
Mhm.
just you mentioning that, it just like flashback to all these kids that I was pouring into. They weren't my responsibility,
Right.
but they were my responsibility because they were going to influence my kids one way or another. So,
Mhm.
it's just so important. We have to get away from that self-centered
Mhm.
perspective and realize that you never know whose life you're going to impact how, just by being the right person or being that individual doing the right thing. And
Mhm.
seem like you've been doing it for buku years over here, and I love it. I love
I'm
it.
trying. I'm trying.
Now you're still in the Brooklyn area, right?
Yes, I'm still in the Brooklyn area.
I got some. I have a handful of clients that live in Brooklyn. So
Mhm.
whenever I'm back up in the area, we may have to get a coffee and like, let me pick your brain some more.
Yeah, definitely, definitely.
Sure.
And
All right, Michelle.
I have my book now, so I'm definitely open to different places. I've done like some
Yes.
work in Las Vegas. Like, I'm open.
Okay. Okay.
Okay.
Hey, that's what we like
Yeah.
to hear.
Yes. So please let us know how we can continue to support you, where
Mhm.
people can find you, and let the world know all the different products that you have and
Mhm.
services that you offer, so we can make sure that we are all staying connected, because that's what the Black Podcast is about.
Yes. So first, I have this book. This is my second book, but it's my first children's book, and they were both Amazon bestsellers. So Shine on Brown Girl is my, newly released children's book. You could go to Amazon and get that book. You can follow me on my Instagram at principal_shine on Lakeasha for all things related to Lakeasha Williams. I do have a company that I newly founded, Brick House Unlimited. And again, that's just going to house, everything that I do, with all of my educational work falls under the umbrella of everything that I do to bring about equity. And the books that I have, Still I Thrive, which I co-authored that, and Shine on Brown Girl. I'm doing extended workshops and different things like that, and speaking engagements because to me that helps with overall wellness of our people and creating the generational wealth. So I'm also a real estate consultant as well. But so all of those things are, my give back to the world, and how I'm leaving a just building my legacy, and not only for my family but for the community at large.
Wow, wow, wow. Well, you are amazing.
Thank
I already knew you was amazing because I found you, so I already knew, but in some things you really like, well, wow, I did good. I did good with this one. But I really, truly, truly appreciate you from
Mhm.
a Black woman to another Black woman. Um, and we need women out there like you in this space of education and leadership, because as I pursue being a athletic director, um, you get to a place and you're like, oh my gosh, like, am I ever gonna, you know, break
Right.
this ceiling? Am I ever gonna get there? You just feel like you get stuck. And so it's women like you that really help to give us hope. When you talked about the power of hope. And
Yes.
so, when I see women like you doing what you're doing in your space, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna let me turn my fire up a little bit. Let me turn my fire up a little bit. So I truly appreciate you from woman to woman. We need you out there. So thank you.
Thank
Um,
you.
but the Black Podcast would like to thank you for just sharing your story and not being ashamed of your story and owning your story. Um,
I
that's what
own it.
we own it. When you own it, it is amazing. And so we appreciate you for owning your story, because that's how we grow. That's how we're going to continue to grow as a community. As
You know
people
what I
share their story.
You know what I always say? People love a testimony, right? And they
Mhm,
love to talk about testimonies. But what makes something a testimony? You had to have been tested, right?
mhm.
You went through the fire, you came through that fire, right? Stronger than ever before. And your willingness to share your story to impact others. That's what makes it a testemony.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's not a testimony, you keep it to yourself.
Right.
That's a self-anomy. I mean, like, you're not doing nothing. You selfish. But we want to thank you for being so vulnerable and opening yourself up and sharing your world with us. We truly, truly appreciate that. And we know that this is just the beginning, because now that we are family,
Yes.
you're no longer a guest. We will always make sure that we continue this relationship, and see what else happens from your gift to ours. And so we just thank you for everything that you're doing, because what you are doing, girlfriend, you are doing it well. Okay.
Thank
And
you.
I just truly appreciate your passion. We appreciate you taking the time to be here, and just thank you for everything that you're doing.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. I enjoyed my time with you. And yes, we're family now.
We are family. So when we call now, so we're gonna put you in the backstage. Do not log off. We'll be right back, and then we'll close out with you.
Okay. All right.
Well, she
All
was
right.
on fire. Huh? It started out like very sweet and soft spoken, and then she said, "Y'all need to be intentional." And after that, it was
Yes.
like, pew. I'm like, well, there it goes. That's what it's all about: being intentional, being consistent, telling the kids every single day how important they are, even when you feel tired, even when you may feel, like you're missing something. Those kids still need us to continue to pour into them, and the more that you continue to pour, the more He'll pour into you, to give to others. So I just love her fire. And doesn't mean I'm gonna stay in education a lot longer now. Now I'm gonna be in an educational space, okay, but not in the classroom. But I just truly appreciate her, and just um, seeing that fire that she has and that passion. You wouldn't be able to see that off those pictures that we see
No.
on her social media. That's not.
Yeah.
This was the real story. That was just a little snippet of what the end result may look like, but definitely something to look forward to learning more about.
Yes, indeed. There's one message I think we need to make sure to stay cognizant of. as we age and we learn new things that could have benefited us as kids, we gotta put our kids in front of it. Like we have got to. We can't say, "Well, dang, if I only knew when." Well, you know now, so go and pour it into the next generation. So,
You sound like somebody's dad.
hey, when you become a parent, you'll understand.
I am a parent. I'm a teacher. I'm everybody's parent.
Truth.
Giving out food, snacks, and money and everything else. So
You're
look.
a parent of a bunch of cherries.
Well, we thank you and we love you. We will see you next week. Please remember, it's so important that you support us. And the way that you support us is by sharing and then going on to wearehsba.com and see how you can help support our organization or our movement and within the Black community to help change the narrative of our young Black males. So we need people like you, whether you're bringing money, because we take money. Okay, so whether you're bringing some money to help donate towards the cause, or if you want to donate your gift, your time, your ideas, we want to know more. We want to see what we can do to make sure that it takes a village, right? So we got to all bring our gifts together and our talents together and our ideas and businesses or whatever we have together so that we can create change and see the change. So we want to thank you for supporting us. We love you, and we will see you next week.
Same place, same time. You have a great week.